Chapter 34, Renegade, page 307. Pike was lounging on the thin bed in the brig for the fifth straight day since his arrest. He was plowing through a copy of a history of the Mongols that Heath Bridger had brought by. The book had been part of a stack the lieutenant had brought in. There'd been no comment, just the delivery. When he'd seen the books, Pike knew that Heath had been poking around into his personal life. Not many people knew that he read or that he preferred histories over anything else when he did read. Pike had never really cared for fiction stories, because after the life he'd had in the system and in the orphanage, he knew those stories never happened. Good endings belonged in fiction. History was different, though. Those things, most of them, had happened. Of course, there was some conjecture about what really happened, but one book would put forth an idea and another book would tear the first one down. Pike enjoyed the arguments too. That sometimes historians and research people weren't certain what truly took place, because then he could figure out what he thought about an event or the people involved. Pike had read about the Mongols before. Genghis Khan was a favorite subject. The Mongols had lived outside of the growing cities and civilized areas, and they had instilled a fear in the Chinese that was big enough to cause the Great Wall to be built. That was something, a fear that big and that deep. On their stout little ponies, always traveling from place to place and taking what they wanted or needed, the Mongols weren't that much different from a motorcycle gang. In fact, one of the outlaw biker gangs had even named themselves after the Mongols, but they weren't anywhere near as fierce as their namesake. Genghis Khan had changed the face of Asia and beyond. Stretched out on the bed, Pike wore camo pants and an OD green tank top that revealed the tattoos normally covered by his BDUs. Usually he wasn't so open with his ink around the Marines, keeping that side of himself private. But since his arrest, some of the old rebelliousness had returned to him. He decided to fly his freak flag. If he was going to be treated like a criminal, he was going to look like a criminal. He let his beard grow too, and it was coming in heavy, darkening his chin with a sandpapery stubble. His head was clear and his heart beat steadily. Before he lay down to read, he'd done an hour of calisthenics to burn off the excess energy and keep himself in shape. Strength and speed were everything to a guy on his own. They were the only assets a survivor truly had, and once they were gone, it was hard to get them back. Gotta keep the tools sharp, bro. Once again, the ideas in Pike's head were exactly what Petey might have said. If you get the chance, you gotta bust out of here. No matter where you go, here or in the States, you can make it on your own. Just get out, get away, and get gone. There's an open highway out there. You never should have gotten complacent. Not in Tulsa. Not in the Marines. You don't belong anywhere. You're a rolling stone, bro. You've been fooling yourself. Pike had been thinking about that, provided he could get away from the base, which wouldn't be all that hard during a transport detail. He could slip across the Dern line into Pakistan. Once he was there, he could set himself up any way he wanted to. All kinds of illegal operations were going on in Pakistan that were open to foreigners willing to get their hands dirty, and not all of them involved terrorists. People needed muscle there, someone who could stick when things got tough and pull the trigger when it came to that. He figured he could cut himself in somewhere, get some money together, and get to wherever he needed to go. He didn't have to return to the States. In fact, the more he thought about it, the more he felt certain he'd limited himself by staying in the U.S. There were a lot of places he'd read about in Europe, but had never seen. He thought maybe he'd like to see Russia and Asia, too. It was a plan, and he liked it. Getting caught killing Captain Zaroff and his flunkies had been the best thing that could have happened to him. It was a double bonus. He'd woken up from the stupor he'd been in since Petey's death. He'd dropped Zaroff and had run out planned from the hole he'd dug for himself. And he'd played the game with the witness protection program only to get stymied and stuck in Tulsa. Once he got himself set up, once he was ready, he knew he could slip back into Texas long enough to kill the men who had killed Petey. Then that debt would be off his head, After that, he could get back to living life on his own terms. The only thing that nagged him was that little second-hand compass. He tucked it under his pillow so that he would be out of the sight, but it wasn't out of mind. Apparently not thinking about it was impossible. And once he started thinking about the compass, he started thinking about Hector, wondering how the boy was and whether he was okay. If anyone was helping him with his math homework. You're thinking about math homework, bro? You ain't domesticated. You ain't even civilized. You're a beast, a caged animal waiting to get out. You need to remember that. Eye of the tiger, bro. That's you. So this, again, italics means that it's the voice in his head of his friend Petey from the past, who usually got him in a lot of trouble speaking to him, okay? All right. All right. We'll skip to here. One of the MPs peered through the grill at the top of the door. Stay back, Private. Pike remained prone on the bed and folded his hands behind his head. He didn't even look at the door. He didn't want company, and he planned to make that clear to whoever stepped inside the holding cell. Only it wasn't Heath Bridger who entered the brig. It was Becca Shaw. She looked at him lying there on the bed and smiled. The smile irritated Pike. He resisted the impulse to sit up or make space on the bed. Her unexpected appearance made him feel uncomfortable and slovenly. You see something funny, Corporal? For a guy looking at getting charged with murder in the first degree and getting tried in a military court at that, you seem awfully relaxed. Pike shrugged and kept staring at the ceiling. I am relaxed. This ain't no thing. Been here before. He noticed the brown bag she carried into the cell, and now the aroma of freshly baked food and spices tickled his nose. His stomach growled noisily and embarrassingly loud. The tips of his ears burned, and that irritated him even more. You're also hungry. I'm not hungry. Well, I am. I'm on my lunch break. Becca sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the bag. I also have enough for two. Actually, I have enough for three, but it should share out okay for both of us. What are you doing here? Pike refused to look at her. It was childish and he knew it, but some mannerisms from the orphanage and foster care stayed ingrained forever. Like I said, lunch break. They got other places around camp where you eat. Yeah, and those places are a lot more welcoming and festive. So I was thinking to myself, who needs that crap? Despite Pike's mood, her unabashed sarcasm made him smile. She wasn't shy about eating either. She opened a styrofoam container and dug into some rice and meat dish that smelled absolutely fantastic. His stomach growled again. Becca didn't say anything. She just kept eating. Pike frowned. You're just gonna sit there? I'm eating, and I'm enjoying the silence. You know, most places around the camp get noisy. Everywhere you go, people are talking. I can see how quiet in the brig fits the alpha male thing that you do so well. Pike snorted. I don't do anything. Yeah, you do. Most guys do. They reach for some tough guy facade, and they do it mostly when they don't know what else to do. Like when they get in over their heads. Maybe you don't know as much as you think you do. Of course I do. I know stuff. I'm a woman. I think about stuff, about the way people go together, about why some guys talk and why some guys go dark. And because I think about them, I know stuff about them. Becca took another bite. You know stuff too. Intrigued, just a little, Pike looked at her. You knew about the Russian, that Zaroff had killed him and stolen some evidence, or just to shut the man up. You knew about the tattoos. I didn't know any of that. Neither did Lieutenant Bridger or Gunny Towers, so yeah, you know stuff. Feeling uncomfortable with all the closeness inherent in the conversation, Pike looked at her and decided to push her back to create distance. You call him Lieutenant Bridger when you guys are alone? Bright spots of color appeared on Becca's cheeks, and her eyes wouldn't meet Pike's. He decided he wasn't pulling any punches. He wanted her out and gone. I mean, since we're on the topic of stuff I know, I thought I'd point out that I picked up what's going on between you, the two of you. Nothing's going on between the two of us. But you wish it was. Because he wanted to hurt her for invading his privacy, Pike kept going. He's out of your league. That guy? He's used to flashy society women, cut his teeth on cheerleaders and sorority girls. You're from some hick town and you got a kid. You're nothing but a lot of headaches. You think you're anywhere on his radar? Becca picked through her rice for a piece of lamb. Her lower lip trembled a bit, but she got it back under control again pretty quickly. Pike was impressed because he knew he'd hit the target dead off center. Don't want to talk about this stuff? I, I know any more? Becca lifted her eyes to his and returned his gaze full measure. If I knew for sure what was going on, and if you were civil, maybe I would talk to you about it. But since you're not being civil, and I don't know what or if anything is going on, or even if I want anything like that going on, we're not going to discuss that particular topic. Pipe wanted to strike back and hit her again, push her away, but he heard the emotion buried in her words and knew the subject was a tender one. Sighing, knowing that he didn't have the heart to hurt her more, and that he was being weak, he pushed himself into a sitting position and looked down at her. The offer for lunch still open? You're lucky you're not wearing it. Becca passed the other styrofoam container over. Pike took the container and then nodded at the other end of the bed. I got a seat up here if you want. She was stiff and not so open, but she wasn't leaving either. I'm perfectly comfortable where I am. You're stubborn. That was something Pike respected. It was a survival skill. And you're a jerk. In spite of the situation, Pike laughed. He opened the container and sorted through the food, picking out a piece of lamb and popping it into his mouth. The juice was delicious. The Marines pay you for this? She looked at him in puzzlement. If you pay for this, let me know what my part is. In fact, I'll buy lunch since you bought it. You got a kid to feed. I don't want to be taking nothing off his plate. My son is just fine and I'm fine. I can afford to buy you lunch. You shouldn't have to. I didn't have to. Pike rolled up a ball of rice and ate it. You're here because you were told to be here? Actually, I'm here because I wanted to be. I could have gone to Lieutenant Bridger and let him handle this. Handle what? Pike didn't really care. He already had his game plan in place, waiting to put it into play. But he was a little curious, briefing you on the investigation. Pike shook his head. MPs already do that. I hear them talking. A couple of young ones act like they're holding some kind of an international terrorist in here. You've got a reputation as a dangerous guy. Pike didn't say anything to that. And I wasn't talking about Hollister's investigation into the shooting. That's pretty cut and dried. I was referring to the investigation Lieutenant Bridger, Gunny Towers, and I are making into Captain Zaroff. Pike kept eating. As it turns out, Captain Zaroff is a component in the local black market. He's been accused, but not successfully, of misplacing military ordnance that later turned up in the hands of people who shouldn't have had it. The Russian guy? In spite of his decision to remain aloof, Pike nodded. His name is Emil Estafiev. Where did you get the name? Becca looked at him. Did you know his name? Pike gave her a look and didn't say anything. I'm not here to give anything other than lunch away for free, Pike. It works like this. I tell you something and you tell me something. For a long minute, the silence stretched in the cell, and Pike occupied himself with his meal. The food was good, and he was hungrier than he'd thought. He didn't think Becca could wait him out. The women he'd known weren't much when it came to patience. They knew stuff, or even thought they knew stuff. They generally had to tell it or explode. Becca didn't show any signs of that. She worked at her meal, too, and didn't look at him. Grudgingly, Pike gave in to his curiosity. I knew the last name, Estafiev. Didn't know the first one. You'd never seen him before the day in the machine shop? Nope. You went looking for Zarp because you knew he took something from Estafiev. Thought he did. Did he? Pike hesitated again, remembering Petey's constant advice. Can't trust anybody outside your skin. Pike closed his mouth and saw his friend. This time Petey was dying in his arms, bleeding out, and there wasn't anything Pike could do about it. Can't trust anybody. Don't be stupid. I don't know. Maybe there was something. Maybe Estafiev was just carrying information. How do you know that? Pike shook his head. I've been doing all the giving. Becca nodded. Lieutenant Bridger has developed some contacts within the black market. How? Bribery. Pike laughed. Not exactly the Marine Corps playbook. The lieutenant says that he learned that work in court cases with his father. Anyway, during the investigation, he turned up another name that connected to Estafiev's. A guy named Danica. Becca struggled with the pronunciation. Pike had pronounced the name correctly. She looked at him with renewed interest. You know that man? No. At that point, Pike knew Becca had deliberately stumbled over the name. He mentally kicked himself. I've been around Russians. Heard the name before. So who is Danica? A munitions dealer handling Russian ordnance. The same kind of ordnance he turned up in the machine shop. Pike picked up another piece of lamb and chewed thoughtfully for a moment before swallowing. See if this focuses it a little bit. There we go. There was a Russian that called Zarov. I overheard the conversation. If it was Danica, he was after some merch that went missing. Merch? Becca looked puzzled. Pike chuckled and licked juice from his thumb. You're new to this cops and robbers stuff, ain't you? She flushed slightly but didn't say anything. Merchandise. Danica was looking for goods that got misplaced. Maybe the Tangles weren't the only people Estefy was supplying. Danica thought Zarov had his missing merch. Pike shrugged. If he was the guy on the phone that night, yeah. I'll let Lieutenant Bridger know. Becca pushed herself into her feet and bundled up her trash. She put Pike's in the bag as well. This still doesn't mean we can get you out of here. I never thought it did. But the lieutenant wanted me to tell you not to lose faith. Sure, maybe I'm not as big a believer in the system as Bridger is. Becca eyed him, hesitating. Faith's an important thing. Living without it makes a hollow life. I've just recently learned that. Could be something you need to think about. Pike had noticed his deployment that Becca seemed changed, more accepting and less fretful. She had always been a good Marine and a solid person, but he noticed the difference. I'll keep that in mind. Oh, something else. Becca reached into her pocket, took out a letter. Mail call. That surprised Pike. He'd never gotten a mail call. He accepted the small letter, but didn't look at it, thinking maybe it was from Mulvaney. But that would have been a serious breach in witness protection protocol. Becca glanced at it. You got a son you've never mentioned? No. Pike figured he knew who the letter was from, but he didn't know how Hector had written to him. That's from a young boy, Becca smiled. I recognize the handwriting. I get letters that look like that one. It usually has crayon pictures. Pike nodded, not saying anything. Becca knocked on the door and left, heart beating a little faster, emotions tangled in a goopy ball of his stomach. Pike glanced at the letter. It was addressed to Private Pike Morgan, USMC, and the Marine address was underneath it. After all the time spent helping the boy with his homework, Pike would have recognized his handwriting anywhere. He opened the letter carefully. Mr. Pike, I hope you're okay. I'm okay. I miss you. I pray every night that God will keep you safe. He sees you all the time, so I ask him to look out for you because I'm here and I can't look out for you. I'm doing the best I can with math, but I hope you get back soon. Pike kept reading. There wasn't a lot because the message got repetitive, and when he finished, he read the letter over again. For the first time since he'd been arrested, Pike truly felt caged. There was another life out there, and he couldn't get back to it, or away from it. He leaned his head against the wall, closed his eyes, and tried not to feel the emptiness that echoed within him. Chapter 35, page 219. 2 days later, Heath caught up with Ilya Danica, the Russian black marketer, had pulled out of sight even more in the wake of Estefy's death. Heath and Gunny Towers had been hard-pressed to find the man, even with the money Heath had spent looking for him. Bribery was a secondary and desperate economy that flowed through Kandahar. Finally, though, an informer came up with the intel that Danica was staying in a small warehouse in one of the industrial sectors of the city. Heath assigned his unit to cover the area, and then closed in on the warehouse early in the morning before dawn. You roust them this early, they're going to know straight off that this ain't nothing but they want to hang around for. Gunny Towers stood beside Heath in an alley across the street. He held binoculars to his eyes and studied the warehouse through the pre-dawn dark. Danica's already on edge. Heath adjusted his gear, tightened the straps on his ammo rack. He's going to run as soon as we hit the door, but we're ready for him. Towers lowered the binoculars. How do you want to do it? During the morning prayer session. That was only moments away. Things will be loud and busy. The Russians will ignore the prayers because they're used to them. They'll have their guards down. We'll take advantage of that. Nodding, Towers put his binoculars away. Sounds good to me. Then let's do it. He sat in the passenger seat of the Humvee while Towers drove. Two more Marines sat beside them. Towers pulled the Humvee to a stop at the warehouse next door, to one that they targeted. As he climbed out of the Humvee, he felt the eyes on him. He adjusted his helmet, making certain his chin strap was tight. And then when the ululating call to prayer rang out over the city, he headed towards the target warehouse. I've got movement inside the building. Becca's voice was calm and controlled. She was in the alley across the street, keeping watch through binoculars. Make sure we contain everyone who leaves the building. Heath unlimbered his M4A1 and picked up the pace, jogging towards the warehouse door. At his side, Towers already had a shaped C4 charge in his left hand, ready to go. Roger that. At the door, Towers slapped the charge into place beside the door lock. Fire in the hole! He looked away from the door as Heath backed off and raised his assault rifle. Towers triggered the detonator, and the small explosion barely made a dent in the call to prayer that echoed over the city. A fist-sized hole appeared in the door where the locking mechanism had been. Smoke climbed swiftly into the air and dissipated. Move in! Heath grabbed the door in his gloved hand and yanked it open. He shoved the M4A1 inside and then followed the weapons. Towers came at his heels. From the corner of his eye, before he stepped inside, he spotted the other Humvees racing forward to close the cordon around the building. The two Marines had accompanied Towers and Heath, had held their positions at the entrance to provide an extraction point if it became necessary. Heath hoped Danica was on the premises and that the Russian would agree to tell what he knew. Otherwise, Heath was going to be in a lot of hot water for the unauthorized raid. The warehouse held several crates, but with a lot of empty space too. Evidently, the goods Danica dealt in didn't have much of a shelf life. Then again, with all the renewed attacks within the city, munitions were cycling quickly. Heath kept moving forward, working through the stacks of crates. He'd gotten blueprints of the building, but even though the structure was fairly new compared to the rest of the city, the layout inside the warehouse wouldn't necessarily match the original schematics. Towers covered his six. Never more than one long stride away. Radio chatter over the mission freak let him know some of the warehouse's occupants had already stepped outside into the Marine's trap. Although he knew he couldn't afford the distraction, Heath kept listening for Becca's voice. As long as he could hear her, he knew she was okay. He was still surprised how she'd gotten Pike to open up to her. Unfortunately, some small part of him wasn't happy about that, for reasons he couldn't quite put his finger on. He also knew he didn't want to go exploring that particular unease too much. Keep your head in the game. A man peered around the corner of the stack of crates ahead. United States Marine Corps. He made his voice loud and strong. Stand down! Get on your stomach! Before the man could move, gunshots sounded. Behind Heath, Towers cursed and staggered away. Swiveling, Heath aimed at the head and hands of the man lying atop crates to the right. He squeezed the trigger and watched as splinters leapt from the crates. The man fired again. Heath's neck spurs tattooed across his face, and he went slack. The man in the corner in front of him started shooting a pistol. He stayed where he was, covering Towers, who had taken a round in his back. He fired two more bursts and plucked the shooter from the corner as Towers started shoving himself back to his feet. I'm okay, Towers grimaced. His dark face etched with pain. Armor stopped a bullet. Got the wind knocked out of me for a minute. When you're ready, Gunny. Towers nodded and adjusted his helmet. I'm ready, let's go. Heath led the way, taking longer strides now, eating up the distance and listening to the crackle of gunfire outside the warehouse. As he passed the dead man beside the crates, he kicked the pistol away, and the weapon slid under a forklift in the next aisle. Danica and three of his men were at the rear door, peeking out anxiously, weapons in their hands. They didn't see Heath and Towers closing in on them until it was too late. 20 feet away, one of the men turned and started to pull away from the door. He spotted Heath and yelled what Heath believed was a warning in Russian and then opened fire. He spaced a burst across the man's chest and watched him fall away as the other three men wheeled. Danica stood to the left, a large caliber Israeli handgun in his fist. The Russian was thin and dark. His salt and pepper hair was buzzed close to his skull, and he had a short cropped salt and pepper beard as well. Tattoos coiled around his neck, creeping up from the sweater he wore. One was in the middle of his forehead, and Heath knew from Pike's discussion of Russian crime tattooing that Danica had probably gotten it when he'd been ousted from some mafia organization. Danica! Heath held his assault rifle centered on the man while Towers covered the other two. Put down your weapon and you get to live today. Why are you here? The Russian's English was heavily accented. The United States Marine Corps wants to talk to you about ordinances you've been helping deliver to Al-Qaeda operatives in Kandahar. We've got a proof of your involvement. You can live or die in the next minute. Heath paused. You decide, or I'll decide for you. Towers' voice was thick with threat and boomed inside the warehouse. He was in full gunnery sergeant mode. You heard the man. Me, I've got an itchy trigger finger, and you've been supplying guys that have been killing my men. I might not be able to wait long. The two men beside Danica tossed their weapons aside and held up their hands. Danica cursed and then tossed the big pistol aside as well. Heath let out a tense breath and moved forward. Get down on your stomachs, hands behind your heads. Sullenly, the three men obeyed. Heath moved among them, securing each man in turn with disposable cuffs while towers watched over them. The gunfire outside had tapered off to an occasional pops. Becca, Heath pulled Danica roughly to his feet. We're here. We got them. The team? Standing up. We're all good here. Some of the tension Heath unraveled and went away. He put a hand against Danica's back and pushed him into motion. Roger that. Who is that man? Major Hollister stared through the grill in the brig door. The major wasn't happy, and it had taken Heath 2 hours to get the man to break his schedule. Inside the room, Danica sat on the bed. Ilya Danica. He used to be Russian military back in the 80s. He flicked through the images on his iPad, showing Danica in a Russian military uniform. The man had been young and earnest. He had gotten the images from a helpful CIA agent who'd done background research on Danica. Then in the 90s, Danica joined up with the Russian mafia. More images followed of police reports from 3 different countries. Somewhere in there, he ended up working on his own here in Afghanistan. Hollister looked away from the door and focused on Heath. The mafia? Like the Russian? Your team turned up at the bomb-making facility? Yes, sir. What does this mean? Man have to do with me? He cycled through the scanned images on the document on his iPad. What I have here is a signed confession from Danica. He had an arrangement with Estefeev, the Russian, and the Captain Zaroff executed after my team discovered and shut down the bomb-making facility. Estefeev had brokered a deal for munitions, which he was selling to Al-Qaeda and to Danica. Estefeev hadn't delivered the weapons to Danica before he was killed. Do we know whose those weapons are? No, sir. Well, that's unfortunate. Yes, sir. Heath paused and then got back on track, knowing that he had to keep his explanation short, the way he had to when he was in the courtroom to keep a jury focused. When Captain Zaroff killed Estefeev, he recovered the contact information for Danica. Danica says that Zaroff called him and said that he knew where the weapons shipment was going. It was going to cost him to recover it. Hollister's eyes narrowed in understanding. Zaroff was blackmailing Danica? Trying to do it, yes, sir. The night that Captain Zaroff was killed, Danica was on his way to finish negotiations. Heath pointed to the iPad screen. He admits to that in this. Says he was outside the building when the Marines arrived. Danica was there to take possession of the weapons. Yes, sir. Hollister considered that. Zaroff didn't have a weapons cache with him that night. No, sir. And we didn't recover any information regarding those weapons. No, we did not. Then I don't understand why I'm here. Unless you're wanting congratulations for capturing this man and getting a confession out of him. You could have written that up in the report. This is just part of your job, Lieutenant. Yes, sir, it is. So it is taking care of my unit. He put his iPad at his side and gazed into Hollister's eyes. The plate was on the table, and he wasn't about to back away. I want Pike out of the brig, sir. Hollister frowned and shook his head. The man killed 3 Afghan National Police officers. Pike killed men who were planning to resell the munitions Estefeev brought into Kandahar. Alleged weapons, as you said. You didn't recover any of those. No, sir, we did not. But we did recover a lot of Russian ordnance from the site where Estefeev was initially taken into custody before Captain Zaroff murdered him. I'd say the circumstantial evidence for the existence of the munitions is strong. Danica tells a believable story. If Pike hadn't been there, that transaction might have taken place and those weapons would be out there in the streets. You know, you don't know what they haven't ended up, it wouldn't have ended up there already. Haven't ended up there already. Heath took his breath. No, sir, I don't. But I do know that Pike's presence there that night exposed the operation for us. Danica is cooperating, naming names. We've got more targets to hit over the next few days. I'm confident that the situation we have now will enable us to make a difference in pursuing Al-Qaeda and those weapons. Hollister's frown deepened and his displeasure was palpable. Private Morgan isn't an innocent, Lieutenant. I didn't say he was. He paused to set himself. But he's one of my Marines. That night, Pike was following Captain Zaroff, a man suspected to be corrupt, in an effort to find out what had triggered the execution of a Marine prisoner. He went there to murder Zaroff. With all due respect, sir, I'm going to have to disagree with you there. If Pike had wanted to kill Zaroff, he would have done that in the street and walked away clean. Instead, he nearly got killed, exposing the situation that led to us to the capture and confession of Danica, in addition to ending Captain Zaroff's participation in munitions dealings. And that was a nice face as Heath could put on the Afghan National Police captain's death. Pike's involvement was also instrumental in uncovering Danica and his people, and the pipeline that we'll be following up on. The way I see it, Pike is responsible for both of those results. That's the way I'm putting it in my report. The last was a challenge, and Heath knew it. In the future, Hollister would remember that Heath wasn't exactly a team player, and that was fine. That man doesn't belong in the Marines. Hollister spoke forcefully, but without the conviction he'd had. Again, with all due respect, sir, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that as well. He didn't know he was willing, hadn't known he was willing to go that far with Pike's case until he'd been standing on the edge of the cliff and jumped. His commitment surprised him, but he knew he was willing to stand by what he'd said. Pike was different. Maybe he'd never make a conventional Marine, but he looked after his unit. And for whatever reason, Heath knew Pike needed a second chance, just like Darnell Lester. Hollister glared at Heath, but Heath didn't flinch. The judges he faced were more stern, and even they paled when compared to his father's displeasure. Fine, Lieutenant. Get your man out of the brig, and find a way to keep him out of my sight. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. He saluted as the major returned and walked away, and then he headed back to Pike's cell.